During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln created a document called the Emancipation Proclamation. This document said that any slaves in the country were declared free. Some of the slaves set out to join the Union Army and fight for their own freedom. Although, in the Confederate States it was illegal to own slaves, most of the Southern population ignored these rules because they seceded from the Union. The Confederates started to notice African American soldiers in the Union Army. This is what gave the Confederates the idea to have slaves work as soldiers. These slaves were forced to fight against their freedom. They had to fight against the army that would ultimately free them.
Although the Confederates used slaves in the war, slaves were used as a last-ditch effort. The Confederates preferred using white men to fight and women to do non-combative work for their wars. In addition, many slaves were owned by farmers, which meant that there weren't many slaves left to help fight in the war. Another problem was that if any generals came across escaped slaves, they were forced to return them to their original owner.
When African Americans were actually fighting in the war, they fought with many white men. Most of the white men harassed the African American men. This harassment even led to some black soldiers committing suicide and affecting their performance on the battlefield.
Other than fighting in the wars themselves, some slaves were forced to grow food and crops for the soldiers and generals out in the battlefield. They also had other uses for the Confederates. They would also be forced to build barricades or forts and would sometimes have the painful job of paving roads for the Confederates.
In conclusion, African American slaves were treated worse than when they were working on farms. They were forced to do even worse jobs when they worked in the war. But they did not have to do as much work due to the fact that many were used as a last-ditch effort towards the end of the war.